John Bonham represents the rawest of Led Zeppelin. The ferocity, the talent, the sheer electricity of the music, the anger, the violence, the demons it brought. John Bonham was made to drum. He was made for Led Zeppelin. But was everything that came with the stardom made for John Bonham? The Beatles may have sweetly asked the world to please me as they ushered in the era of stadium concerts, but Led Zeppelin took the idea and corrupted it. Lyrically, they carved out their own path. They didn't want the world to please, they wanted it to squeeze till the juice runs down my leg. They turned their stadiums into debauched, decadent, and dangerous road shows. It was almost as if the band was propelled by an ominous, thundering heartbeat, a heartbeat that rumbled from deep inside one man. John Bonham wasn't just given the nickname The Beast, he earned it, and I imagine his mother would agree. After putting her through 26 hours of labor, Bonham was born on May 31st, 1948, near Birmingham, England. Shortly after Bonham was born, his heart stopped beating. To add to Bonham's mother's terror, the doctor on duty was missing. As the moments ticked by, a quick-thinking nurse hauled in another doctor who was able to revive baby Bonham. After the situation had calmed down, the nurse confessed that it was a miracle that the baby had survived, and so Bonham's days of causing pulse-pounding mayhem had begun. By the age of 5, Bonham was driving his mother nuts. He would camp out in the kitchen pounding on pots and tins with knives and forks. She must have seen something though, because when he was 10, she got him a snare drum. For his 15th birthday, his father gritted his teeth and bought Bonham a real drum kit. Bonham's headmaster also saw something. In the boy's report card, he wrote that Bonham would either end up a dustman or a millionaire. Neither the rigid British class system nor certain headmasters could quash Bonham's drumming dreams. By day, the mighty percussionist would do back-breaking physical labor at the family construction company, and at night he would pound away till dawn with the various local bands. By 1964, when he was only 17, the magic was already starting to happen in both his music and his love. Bonham may have lived in the suburbs, but in the 60s even they were pulsating with a rich music scene. By now, the wild-haired Bonham had not only earned the nickname Bonzo, but also a reputation as an outstanding drummer. It was at a local dance that he met a pretty blonde named Pat who would soon be his wife. The magic continued when fate shoved Bonzo into the path of 3 other extremely talented musicians and their incredible manager, Peter Grant. It's mind-blowing how 4 dudes, John Bonham, Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones, just jamming together for the first time in a room below a London record shop in 1968, would go on to birth hard rock, revolutionize the music industry, and become the center of a swirling storm of substance-fueled madness, devouring everything in its path. And at the heart of it all, as bassist Jones recalled, as soon as I heard John Bonham play, I knew this was going to be great. But on the other side of that coin, his genius came with the dark side. The year 1969 was a time of upheaval for many, including journalist Ellen Sander, who covered Led Zeppelin's tour supporting their first album. At the tour's end, she went backstage and the band members, led by Bonzo, lunged at her while shrieking and ripping her clothes off in a frenzy. I was terrified, Sander said. The backstage nightmare continued for Sander. All of a sudden, there were all these hands on me and all these big guys, she recalled. The band's manager, Peter Grant, a hulking former wrestler, began heading toward her. Thankfully, instead of piling on, Grant ripped Bonzo off of Sander, allowing her to escape. Sander said, with a grace they did not deserve, "They didn't hurt me except for my feelings." Sadly for Bonzo, that wouldn't nearly be the end of his antics. As savage as the backstage incident was, Bonzo's booze-fueled debauchery got even worse. There is a famous photo of the Beatles laughing as they fish out of the window of the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle. Cute, right? If there was a similar photo of Led Zeppelin a few years later at the same spot, well, let's just say that it would be for a more mature audience. What happened at the Edgewater on that fateful day should definitely stay in the Edgewater. Alas, the incident became infamous as one of the most depraved acts in the history of rock. As friend of the band Vanessa Gilbert recalled, she was getting high and looking out at the water when Bonzo popped out on his balcony and yelled, "You guys gotta come and see this." When Gilbert got to Bonzo's room, she couldn't believe her eyes. She said he proudly pulled back his shower curtain to display at least 8 mud sharks swimming on top of each other. The band's manager was lying on the bed with a bottle. It was a bizarre scene that would only get worse. The details that follow are a much disputed part of Zeppelin lore, but as Gilbert tells it, they were taking a mud shark and rubbing it on one of these girls. In some versions, they of course did a lot more than that. Then, as Gilbert said, after that, everything in the hotel room started going out the window, even the ashtrays. All of this pandemonium caused Bonham to have a meltdown. Throwing the contents of Bonham's hotel room into Elliott Bay was hard work because everything was screwed down, but he was nothing if not persistent. What happened next shouldn't be surprising. As Gilbert recalled, after a couple hours of this, Bonzo realizes it's his room and he turns into a big baby. He wants to go to sleep, and now he doesn't have a bed to sleep in because it's floating in the ocean. Now, we're not looking for Easter eggs here, but isn't it curious that Bonzo changed the name of his epic drum solo from Pat's Delight after his wife to Moby Dick when it was released as a track on Led Zeppelin 2, just a few months after the Mud Shark incident? Regardless, many folks consider it one of the greatest drum solos of all time, so all's well that ends well, I suppose. During the band's live shows, Bonzo would sometimes make Moby Dick last up to 30 minutes, which allowed his band some me time. Again, information for a more mature audience. According to legendary groupie Pamela Des Barres, she was sashaying backstage with Jimmy and Robert while Bonzo thrashed away on Moby Dick. It was like being wrapped up in a thunderous hurricane of expanding, contracting, holy sound. As wild as Bonham's life sounds, long stadium tours can be a total grind. To add to his frustration, the band's success meant that they couldn't leave their hotel rooms without causing chaos. Bonham's bandmate John Paul Jones said he really hated being away and he hated flying, so that was another thing that made him drink. Inevitably, Bonham's self-medicating was becoming a big problem. Who needs diazepam when you can cure your fear of flying with a private jet? Obviously, the band didn't get one for that purpose, but some armchair shrink thought that letting Bonzo sit in the cockpit would be a good idea because A, it's all about control, and B, he loved cars and fast driving. Booze, aircraft, and a madman. It seems they were creating a self-inflicted wound here. Time to call Mothers Against Drunk Pilots. As bassist Jones remembers it, Bonzo suddenly realized flying was a bit like driving his car. They let him do a few moves, the plane lurched. John came out of the cockpit with a big smile on his face and he said, "That's the fastest thing I've ever driven." And when John Bonham grinned, that was rarely a good thing. You see, the band didn't just tour by air. The band upgraded to the much larger Starship. It featured a bar, a 9-meter couch, and a bedroom with a white fur bedspread. And the first time the band used the plane, who else but Bonzo caused a ruckus? Knowing Bonzo, he was likely still blitzed when he boarded the Starship looking dapper in his Clockwork Orange-inspired bowler hat. Knowing the recent past, an unsettling choice of inspiration. Shortly after takeoff, when Bonzo ambled back to use the plane's lavatory, where troubles followed even down the drain. As Bonzo entered the loo, there was a huge whoosh, and all of a sudden his hat was sucked down the toilet. Apparently, the crew had forgotten to fasten the cap on the chute that the toilets emptied from. It would almost have been funny if the sudden loss of cabin pressure wasn't so dangerous. The crew was unable to fix the problem and everyone on board was starting to feel the lack of air pressure. However, instead of landing immediately, they decided to keep going and just keep the plane really low. They flew from Dallas to New Orleans at 8,000 feet instead of the usual 30,000. As Robert Plant recalled, "So John had lost his hat, but then we all lost our minds." Anyone who flies private should really have a classy car to match, or a dozen. One time while in LA, Bonham and his manager Peter Grant decided to stop into a Rolls-Royce dealership. As scruffy Bonham, who probably didn't look like the brand's typical clientele, was admiring a silver shadow, a salesperson hurried over and said, "Sonny, don't put your hands on it unless you can pay for it." Bonham, not likely used to being treated that way, decided to have a little fun. How much is it then? After the dealer told him the price of the car, Bonham said to his manager, "Quick, give me 85 grand." And Grant pulled out a paper bag full of cash. With a flourish, Bonham dumped it on the table and was the proud owner of a glorious new Rolls. Thus far in our automobiles adventure, Bonzo hated planes, loved automobiles, and wreaked havoc on one train ride in particular. During the band's 1971 Japan tour, Bonzo took his typical sloppy horseplay a few notches too far. When bandmate Jimmy Page and his girlfriend went to the dining car, Bonzo found the girlfriend's purse and, well, there's no other way to say this, Bonzo dropped his captain's log in it. If you, the viewer, are wondering if it could get worse, well, yes it could, all while he was still in Japan too. At the Tokyo Hilton, brutish Bonzo, who likely had superhuman strength from pounding away for 3 hours most nights, picked up a room service card and threw it at a record company executive while he was having a shower. And yet, it gets stranger still. So far, you may not have pegged Bonzo as a refined man, but one evening while in Japan, he and the band's manager Richard Cole decided to seek out some cultural artifacts. The lads snagged some super sharp samurai swords, as one does, and proceeded to slice and dice their rooms beyond recognition, but this was just the warm-up. In what could have been a scene from A Clockwork Orange, the two boozers bounded down the hall, swords in hand, and chopped their way into bassist John Paul Jones' room. If he hadn't been so out of it, he probably would have had a heart attack. Jones was so inebriated that he didn't wake up when they dragged him out to the hallway. Bonzo and Cole then sliced Jones' room to smithereens, all while Jones slept soundly in the hotel hall. The next morning, a shocked housekeeper got an earful of curses when she tried to wake the dazed and confused Jones, who at first didn't realize that he wasn't even in his room. To no one's surprise, the Tokyo Hilton band Zeppelin for life. You might say Bonzo was an artist of destruction, with every new hotel room as his blank canvas. At one of the exclusive and secluded Chateau Marmont bungalows in LA, he and manager Cole went on a particularly abominable spree with an X-rated entertainer named Dahlia the Dog Act, acts that we will carefully step ourselves through. The band's manager Cole arranged for Dahlia the Dog Act to come to the bungalow and perform for him and Bonzo. When it wasn't up to his expectations, Cole, eager to see a show, went so far as to fry up some bacon and use it to lure the dog into action. The show they came for wasn't happening, so Cole stepped in and proceeded with Dahlia. As that went on, he urged Bonzo to step in and take over. No bacon was needed, and during the act, Bonzo asked Cole for some feedback as Cole cheered him on. The Chateau Marmont has hosted a lot of wild behavior, but this must have been a first. Grant, the other manager, burst into the room while Bonzo was in the thick of things and dumped a gigantic industrial-sized can of baked beans all over the entwined lovers. To wash it all down, he proceeded to pop a bottle of champagne and spray it all over the pair. That is the baked beans incident, and so we continue on. Something much darker happened aboard the starship. To fortify himself for the flight, Bonzo consumed a whole bottle of booze and passed out. When he awoke, he stumbled out of the bathroom wearing only a robe. Then he grabbed at a flight attendant who happened to be walking past him. Consent was clearly a foreign term. As Bonzo pawed and clawed at the flight attendant, he threw open his robe and then announced his intention to the crowded plane. The petrified flight attendant let out a piercing scream, and Cole and Grant came running. They ripped Bonzo off the woman and put her in the care of guitarist Page, who gently tried to console her for the next 10 minutes. To make matters so much worse, this happened in front of a bunch of journalists who were traveling with the band. Bonham was a man of stark contrasts, which becomes clear when you compare his boozy, rock god lifestyle of sold-out shows and screaming fans to his calm and happy home life. He used some of his mountains of cash to buy and fix up an idyllic farm in Worcestershire for his growing family, Pat, daughter Zoe, and son Jason. He even started breeding cattle. That said, keeping the two very different worlds in balance was becoming an increasingly insurmountable task. By the mid-70s, the band had become a big bad monster. Everywhere they went, they were breaking attendance records, grabbing headlines, and leaving legions of terrorized hotel staff in their wake. One newspaper called Zepp's fans the most violent, unruly crowds ever to inflict themselves upon a concert hall. The pressure was reaching a fever pitch, and Bonham was starting to show signs of strain. The show must go on, especially when unprecedented stadiums full of sweaty fans are clamoring to hear Stairway to Heaven. By 1975, Bonzo would be pounding away on drums with the bag of his vices in full view between his legs. Black Sabbath rocker Tony Iommi said, paraphrased, "I saw John a few times when he'd throw up and then have another hit." Little did the band know that their rock and roll circus tent was a heartbeat away from unraveling. In the mid-70s, Britain's Labour Party got serious about taxing the rich. How serious? Well, the taxman wanted to snatch 83 to 98% of investment income from top earners. This sent the band into tax exile, which meant Bonham didn't enjoy as much family time at his farm. It also caused much more than accounting drama. Adding to the stress of the tax exile, lead singer Robert Plant's wife almost perished in a car accident while the couple were on vacation in Greece. The injured pair flew to the UK for treatment, but their accountant suggested they delay the plane's landing until after midnight to avoid wasting one of their precious few days allowed in England. And while Jimmy Page was in exile in LA, he developed a nasty smack habit that he shared, of course, with Bonzo. If interventions were common then, Bonzo might still be with us. Musician Glenn Hughes said, "Towards the end, he drank so viciously. The guy was miserable, and it doesn't matter how much effing money you've got, alcoholism will take you out." Manager Phil Carlo said, "I don't think it would have lasted much longer. The music was nowhere near as good as it had been." Forget about ridiculous tour riders. During the band's 1977 tour, which would be their last, Bonzo's outbursts were becoming so disturbingly violent that journalists covering the band were given the following instructions. Do not make any sort of eye contact with John Bonham. This is for your own safety. As is often the case with Bonham, it would almost be funny if they weren't being so blunt about it. Pounding the drums almost nightly was no longer providing an outlet for his frustration at being away from his family, and he was regularly provoking fights with anyone and everyone to the point where his bandmates kept secret hotel rooms where they could hide from his out-of-control rampages. When they made plans to go out, someone would whisper, "Shh, don't tell Bonzo." Many celebs are surrounded by yes men, but when you're a coked-out star with anger issues who also has constant backup in the form of burly bodyguards and roadies, you start to feel invincible, and one fateful night in Oakland, that invincibility was tested. Bonham witnessed a security guard smack the hand of band manager Peter Grant's young son. Then havoc broke loose. An epic brawl broke out, and the guard who reprimanded the boy was put inside a trailer and beaten to the point of requiring hospitalization. After the dust settled, the authorities apprehended Bonham, Grant, and 2 other Led Zeppelin crew. The band's reputation was in tatters, and to make matters worse, 2 days after the massive melee, Robert Plant's 5-year-old son succumbed to a stomach virus. It was clearly time for everyone to take a step back. Bruised but not beaten, in 1980, the band decided to go on their first North American tour since 1977. During rehearsals, the band stayed at Jimmy Page's house just outside of London. However, on the morning of September 25th, 1980, when Bonzo still hadn't emerged from his room, the band realized something was very wrong. When bassist Jones and the tour manager went to rouse Bonham that afternoon, he was unresponsive. And at the young age of 32, John Bonham was gone. And as he had recently kicked illicit substances, the only other substance in his system was medication for depression and anxiety. The beating heart that had once propelled the band to their share of good times and bad times had gone silent, and with it, so too did their music. Just a couple months after Bonham's passing, Led Zeppelin announced that without their dear friend, they could not continue as they were. Robert Plant once said on the BBC radio show Desert Island Discs, he was big, he had this way about him, and he said, "Look, you're going somewhere really special, but you will never get there without me." He was right on both ends. His heart could propel them further, but without the heart, There was simply nowhere else to go. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Factinate for more.